This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so we'll kick off. As you've just heard, this conference is being recorded, and at the end of this webinar, we will make available. Oh, can I ask that you put yourself on, please? At the end of this webinar, we will make both the slides and the recording available, and please do share that with any of your colleagues or other utilities that you know that might find it useful. This webinar, unlike last week we just did two 15-minute, very short, sharp webinars. This webinar is going to be slightly different. So the first part is a 15-minute overview of what has been shared on the WhatsApp group. Once we get to the end of that, and I will keep it down to 15 minutes because I know some people are very pushed on time, there'll then be a second part where actually I'm going to talk specifically to one of the utilities in Italy and get some feedback from them, and that will be a great opportunity for people to raise questions or raise any comments that they want to do. And I suggest you do that by typing in the chat on the screen, and that will enable us to know who's going to speak next. There has also been a bit of a change in this week's webinar. The WhatsApp chat seems to have shifted in the last few days. So in the first week when we set this up, there was a lot of information around home working and well-being. The shift this time has moved much more to some much more operational and asset management related questions. So we've actually put those, we've structured this presentation around that. So without further ado, let's move forward. I just need to pull that off my screen. This is the group that, as of today, we've been running for 11 days now, and we have 129 utilities and municipalities who are members of this group. You can see the bulk of them come from Europe, 46 of them there from Europe, but it is mostly water utilities, and there are some other infrastructure utilities here, but it's 130 from 30 countries. We also have extension beyond this WhatsApp group. So you'll see there that we're included in the Water RA's news stream. I know that WASA, the Water Services Association of Australia, has launched something very similar to the COVID-19. Will launch something similar to help the Australian utilities with COVID-19, and that they are also on part of this group, and will be sharing some of the resources that we've got here through their forum. So we've got a lot of outreach going through and a lot of learning that's being shared across the wider industry using some very trusted organizations. And tomorrow, actually, recognizing that, tomorrow there is the American Water Works Association is running a specific webinar on COVID-19, and we've got someone in Isle attending that, and we will feed back here any of the sort of nuggets from that, so that everybody captures the benefits from it. So how's today's going to work? Well, first of all, we're going to pick off some of the questions from the group, and as I mentioned at the beginning, we split those into operations and asset management. So there are basically three questions we're highlighting around the operational aspects of COVID-19, and then there are three on asset management. We've then also highlighted some of the pending questions, some of the questions that haven't yet been answered. And then there's the sharing of key resources. And then, as I mentioned, we'll do an interview with a frontline utility. So jumping straight into it, the first of the three operator-led questions was around operator masks. This was raised by Tullio in Italy. And they noted that they've been washing their masks. Now, obviously, the thing that we all need is appropriate PPE that you can use all the time. But when we're running out of PPE, what can we do to extend the life of them? And in Italy, where they've been at the front line in Europe on this, they've been reusing masks after washing them with alcohol solutions, and you're reusing them for 2 or 3 days. We got a response back from a number of other sources, but in particular Irish Water. Jerry at Irish Water shared that actually the advice from the Health Protection Surveillance Centre there was that wearing PPE when you're in close proximity to people is almost of no benefit. And what this really tells us is on an operational side, it's sticking to the rules of social distancing as much as you can is as important, if not more important, than actually having some of the PPE. And of course, when we've got the PPE, we should be using, extending its life is not the prime thing to be doing. The second question was how to manage operating staff shortages as the epidemic progresses. So this came from Rolf in South Africa. And we had a couple of other similar questions there you can see from Portugal. And we had some shared experiences from Austria, the United Arab Emirates, and Rand Water. And basically, the answer seems to be that everyone's adopting a similar approach of having shift workers and reducing down the number of shifts. So you can see in Al Ain in the UAE, AADC, they used to have 3 shifts. They've dropped that down to 2 12-hour shifts. They've got all of the staff being quarantined and living in a single centre. And then actually in Al Ain, I thought it was really interesting. They've got their 2 shifts working. They've got a 3rd shift that's being assigned to different tasks. And then they've actually got a 4th shift, which is being kept in a safe place, ready to be sort of mobilized if any of the other shifts fall over, which felt like a really sort of forward-thinking way of dealing with it. I liked what in Rand Water, they also have mentioned the way they've been managing this is they've actually actively gone to reduce the footprint that their operating staff exercise. And so there's some good ideas there of things you can do to try and mitigate the potential staff shortages that might come as the epidemic progresses. The third question that came up that we put into the sort of operational category was about decontamination. What's the best way to decontaminate people? And again, we've had responses here from South Africa, North America, and the Philippines. And the question was actually raised by Kathleen in the Philippines, and she shared these instructions that had come from the Department of Health on a chlorine solution disinfectant that could be used, and we sort of included the recipe here, for those of you who can see my screen. But elsewhere, what was very reassuring on one level is that the measures that things like the CDC are saying is that actually there should be no extra requirement for water and wastewater staff over and above the social distancing and over and above the normal procedures that you would take. So there's a bit of reassurance there that currently best practice on decontamination is not that water sector staff are any more prone to exposure. There's some resources on all of these questions. You'll see that what we've done is we've included resources that you can link to refer to at a later date. On the decontamination issue, it's worth noting that there's quite a lot of technology that's available. So there's companies like Ozo Innovations who've got demisting technology. And one of the things we're going to look at over the next week are technical solutions that might help address some of these very specific questions. Because we think that this is actually a specific area where I think we can bring some benefit to this group. Moving now on to the asset management related questions. So here we had question 4 here, because it's the first of the 3 asset management questions. It was what was the impact on water and energy use? What are people seeing as to how that their services are changing due to the epidemic? And we got a similar question from Gary Love in Australia, which was around the sort of commercial impact as we see water patterns shifting between industrial, commercial, and domestic areas. The response from this has been that, in particular, Al Ain were noting, for example, that the challenge that they've highlighted is that the network that's being built wasn't designed to operate in the way that it's currently being operated, and therefore there's quite a lot of stress in the system. And they've highlighted the fact that risk-based demand analysis, in particular on production, so water production is one of the ways that they have modeled this scenario, but that hasn't yet been done for the water network. And it will be interesting to see if over the next week people have got other people are seeing their networks being stressed because of how the water and energy use has shifted in light of the COVID epidemic. Question 5 is about collaboration and whether there's an opportunity here that we can see the shift in the water sector is, as we're sharing these problems, collaboration is going to become ever more important. And we've had some great responses here, noting that in the UK, for example, we have an organisation called Water UK, which is a forum for UK water companies to discuss a whole range of issues, including this, and Water UK are included in this group and are able to tap into the learning that comes from this WhatsApp group. And that there's, I've already mentioned WASA in Australia, and there's some great European bodies, Aqua Publica Europa and Urea, both of which are really stepping up to the plate. So we've got all of these organizations that are stepping forward to try and strengthen collaboration in the water sector. And that's, again, something that's a bit of good news and is worth a bit of celebration, I think. If there are more of these entities, please share them so that we can capture who is doing what and have everybody playing to their particular strengths. And then the last question that I'm going to highlight on this webinar was around monitoring and measurement of coronavirus. Now, you might remember, if you were on last week's webinar, there'd been a little debate about what happened to the coronavirus. Does it die in wastewater, which is what had been originally thought? And then just on the night before we held the webinar, there'd been some news from the Netherlands, which seemed to suggest that it lived. Now, actually, what we've got here is Joe Burgess from South Africa has kindly shared some information around, a bit more information around that particular research that was done in the Netherlands. And Joe works for ISLE in our South African office. And basically, you can see, I won't read the words that are here, but there's this really interesting piece of research that shows that in the Netherlands, they did some analysis before the epidemic arrived there, monitoring RNA from certain wastewater samples. And as the epidemic swept through the Netherlands, they saw a change in what they were recording. Now, this gives us a line of sight to a potential method for monitoring and measuring where the epidemic is and how the outbreak's going. It doesn't necessarily mean that the virus is surviving. I think in general, the evidence seems to be that the virus is deactivated as it goes through the wastewater treatment process. But this is the early indications that there might be a method for monitoring or measuring how the virus is appearing in different communities. Linked to this, we've now also picked up that there's lots of different technologies. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we've made an outreach to some of the tech firms that we work with, and those of you who know ISLE will know that we are particularly specialists in technology and innovation, and we have a database of something like 10,000 different tech firms. And we've reached out to those firms to see who's got specific solutions which might come and address the COVID-19 challenge. And we've already had over 20 responses from those, with them split down into technologies which will help with the detection of contamination. We've got them down to remote monitoring, similar to what we've just been talking about, onto deactivation and removal of the viruses, and then some technologies which are around contingency planning. So there's some, I think that next week on this webinar, we'll probably, unless people tell me they're not interested in it, we'll probably have a bit of a technology focus, because those solutions might provide real opportunities for many of the people on this call. So now we come to the unanswered questions and the remaining sort of pressing issues. There are 3 that we'd like to highlight here. So the first is any evidence on the use of technologies to help fight the pandemic. And as I've just explained, that's one that we're going to try and address specifically next week. Then in South Africa, we had a question raised by Rolf on how can we reduce the transmission of water taps and toilets in informal settlements. So we're talking about shanty towns and peri-urban areas there. where I suspect we have not yet seen the full data as to how the epidemic's sweeping through some of those communities, because they're probably just not collecting the data yet. And then we've had a question which actually was one of the first questions raised on the WhatsApp group and hasn't yet been answered, which is how are operators dealing with access to homes when they have to go and do emergency operations or emergency activities? So if anyone's got any thoughts about those, it would be great to share them. Just keeping an eye on time. So another 30 seconds and I'll be done. We've got this list of shared resources. So as before, we split them down into your daily go-to sites and then some regularly updated websites and blogs. You've got the links here. What we've also done is provided some other shared resources on specifically the impact for water and wastewater utilities and advice to populations and government guidelines. And then there's a list of interesting reads. If your appetite for COVID-related literature isn't sated by the previous ones, there's even more links down there. There are then also some resources which we can't, for various reasons, can't actually access online. But if you want copies of them, please just email myself or Charlotte, and we can provide those to you. And then the final bit here is next steps. What I'd like to say is we're thinking, because the WhatsApp group has almost reached its capacity, you can only have 256 people on the WhatsApp group, and we're already over 200, I think. What we're thinking is maybe splitting the group down into operations and asset management, because there are two different sort of areas, as you've seen today, and it might be that it becomes easier for people to follow if we move to a sort of email type exchange for some of the information. Intrigued to hear your thoughts on that and whether you have a particular preference on being one or other of the groups. The next webinar will be in a week's time on Thursday, the 9th of April. And just as today, we'll do one at this time and one at the end of the day, UK time. With that, I'll just briefly pause. Those of you who are only here for the start of this, then please feel free to drop off. We are about to move into the sort of second phase of it there. I'll just quickly pause in case anyone's got any questions they want to raise. Marvelous. In that case, moving on to the second phase of this. And here's an opportunity for, if people want to speak or share verbally their updates, it's the perfect time to do it. What we've done is we've spoken to two of the Italian utilities who are at the front line of the COVID outbreak here in the UK. And actually, we've got a sort of interview, as it were, with one of them this morning and one of them this afternoon. So this morning, I'm going to be talking to Montagnoli Tullio from A2A, and I'll come back to that in a second. Before I come to you, Tullio, if I could just refer to this afternoon's conversation and share the highlights from that. So this afternoon, we'll be talking to Angelo from AMAP. And AMAP is one of the utilities in Lombardy, Italy. They serve 35 municipalities. And Angelo was really keen to share some of the positives that have come from COVID-19. So he sort of said, well, yeah, the smart working opportunities that we've got. So what he's going to talk about later today is he's going to say that some of the smart working that procedures that they've had to adopt through COVID-19 are then going to continue in a post-COVID-19 world, which I think is a really interesting sort of bit of good news that comes out of this. And he then went on specifically to say there have been some advantages from this. For example, for leak detection, because nobody's traveling, finding leaks just because it's so much quieter, they're seeing a tangible change in that. And he also makes the point that the COVID experience has actually underscored the importance of the water safety plans that they've got in Italy, and it sort of confirmed that many of the things they've been doing have been the right things. If you want to hear more specifically from Angelo, well, he'll be on the call at 4:30 today. Now, if I can come back to Tullio, and Tullio, if you're there, if I could ask you to take yourself off mute. And I'll just do a quick introduction. So Tullio is the chief executive of the water part of A2A. So A2A is the biggest multi-utility in Italy. They don't just do water. In fact, water is a relatively small part of what they do. They're also in gas, electricity, waste management, hydro, those sorts of things. It's a very big utility, 6 billion euros turnover, 10,000 staff. Their water bit is relatively small. Well, size is all relative, isn't it? Their water business has 600,000 customers, so it's that sort of scale. And Tullio is the chief executive of the water part and has been there with the organization for 3.5 years. Tullio, if you're there, can you just acknowledge that you can hear me?
Yes, hi. Hello, Piers, and hello, everyone.
Brilliant. Tullio, it's terrific to have you on here, and thank you for being open to sharing. I do know that your English, you were slightly nervous about your English maybe not being perfect. I promise you, your English is better than my Italian. Could you share with us some of the impacts that you've seen from the virus?
Okay, hello, everyone. Unfortunately, Brescia is one of the provinces most affected in Italy by COVID-19. In Brescia, we have already exceeded 1,300 deaths. In this moment, we have suspended activities from users or customers if they are not necessary to provide the service. Emergency activities and activation of new supplier are made with particular attention at the safety of our operators. I shared the procedure in the WhatsApp group. Also, the reading activity of meters are suspended if the meters are installed inside of the house. Maintenance activities are permitted by law and are continued compatibly with the needs of external contractors, and only if the external contractors have the correct safety devices for your operators. The big construction site for new works fell by 17%. The reason of reduction of construction site are the follow. Away workers cannot work because hotels and restaurants are closed. There is also the difficulty of the rescue operations if an accident occurs on the construction site. There is a big problem. There is a high risk that the rescue workers will not be able to arrive to the construction site quickly. Rescues are constantly busy with COVID-19 cases. We could insert a third critical issue regarding the production world, such as the supply of materials, which in some cases are closed. Our operators live from their home with the company's car and the tablet to record your activity. The normal biological risk procedure have been maintained for operator at the wastewater treatment plant, with greater attention to maintaining distance between operator. In addition to the operational activity, there are office activities. For example, design activities are done from house with smart working. All the employees work from house with PCs connected to the corporate network. The customer office is obviously closed. The employees of customer assistance work in back office from their home and support the employees of call center. This is the view of the main activity in the revolution of our activity. Another, I don't know if you have other question or if you want that I talk about some aspect of safety.
Yes, so please do, Tullio. And please keep going, keep sharing your experiences. These are gold dust. We want to hear them all, and I'm particularly keen to hear whether you feel you're past the peak and whether things are becoming there's any sight of you getting back to a normal state.
I don't. My audio is not very good today. I don't understand the question. If you, or if you
Sorry.
can in the chat.
Yeah. Sorry. Let me say it again. I'm very keen. Please do share your thoughts around the health and safety aspects, and also, can you give us a feeling for whether you're returning to a state of normality or whether you are still in the emergency state?
The difference of normal activity or activity in emergency. I don't understand very well.
Okay.
My audio is very is not good.
I've put the PS's question on the chat if you want, Tullio.
No, no, my audio is not good to this morning. Can you post the question in chat?
It is, yes. Charlotte's put it there. And Pierluigi's actually put it in Italian. That's very good of you. Thank you.
Okay. Now okay. The preview is not simple. Many our external contractor think to work in 1-2 weeks, but only because now is more simple to found the device protection. So I think the work mm, in 2 weeks will be simil normal, but the all the worker must must be more must be very attention to use the device for safety and security, because to arrive at the total normality, I think will 1-2 months.
Excellent. All right. Thank you for sharing that. I'm aware that we've now been going for about half an hour. If I can just pause for a second and just check, is there anyone who'd like to speak or share any direct comments? We've got a question here from James Allen. What type of changes in demand for water supply and wastewater processing is for wastewater processing, given everyone's at home? So this is very similar to the question that came up in the webinar. It's about the shift in plans. And I think if you remember, there was a question from Alain and also from Gary Love in QUU had shared a similar question around, how's this affecting everybody? So maybe that's one. If people feel they've got something they can share now, it would be good to put your sort of hand up and speak. Failing that, it's clearly an issue that we're all experiencing, and this might be something to share more over the coming week. James, do you have a particular? Do you want to take yourself off mute and just share your experiences there?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm in Australia, just outside of Melbourne. So we are not really in the thick of it at this point in time. So our change in demand is only just commencing. So we expect it to be within a manageable range, but there's kind of the known unknowns that we're anticipating. So hence my question.
Excellent. Well, maybe people who are in, Australia is probably a month behind Europe in terms of this coming to you. So maybe any European utilities who've got something they can share, it would be useful. I think I'm keen to respect everybody's time. I'd like to. I've seen some of the comments there, and Jason, Mingo, thank you for sharing the link to the on Nature for that. The reference that linked to the work that had done similar to the work that had been done in the Netherlands. And Tim Barry, I'm so sorry we haven't yet put a star on the map for New Zealand. It will be there next month, next week. Apologies for that. Oh, hang on, we've got some more questions coming through. A question from the Philippines. Did you experience any shortage in equipment or materials? So Tulio, if you're still there, there's a question on the chat that's specifically for you, I think. Hopefully you can see it. It's around, have you experienced any shortage in equipment or materials, such as disinfectant, chlorine, pipes for fixing bursts, those sorts of things? Could you comment on that?
Yes. Oh, short. Okay. Is will or the just a moment. Okay, the experience and shortage in experiment or material difficult because the first week all the mask and all the other equipment for disinfectant are used in the hospital, and the priority was the hospital and the employee in the sanitary company. Now the furniture are normally or semi-normally because the government of Italy buy many of these equipment.
Excellent. All right.
Okay.
Well,
the alcohol, for example, the alcohol was finished in 2 weeks.
Okay. That's a good answer. I've got another question here that you can hopefully see on chat.
Okay, I look at some question. The chemicals, not problem with the chemicals, and for the
case people on the web, can I just read the question so that anyone who's just dialed in hears it? So the question here from Tansel Dera is, I'd like to ask about supply chain issues regarding chemicals, also any challenges regarding regulatory sampling. Over to you, Tulio.
Okay. In the not all the supply chain, about the supply chain, not today, not a big problem. For about chemicals and other product, we didn't have a problem in until now. I don't know if tomorrow or in 1-2 weeks, because the extension of the problem all the Europe could be bring some problem.
Yeah, so I think what you're probably saying there is that the chemical suppliers had stockpiles which they've been able to supply to you, but because they've probably stopped working, those stockpiles are running low. And now that we move into the 5th, 6th, 7th week of the lockdown, the chemical supply is possibly going to become an increasing issue. Is that a fair summary? Can I ask, do you have any comment on the second part of that question around regulatory sampling? So there's obviously an obligation to take samples at various sites to meet regulatory protocols and standards. Have you had any problems doing that sampling?
Pierce, I don't understand very well. I don't. My audio is not good.
That's okay.
I don't. What is the?
One of my colleagues is on the line. He's Italian, and he's kindly offered to speak in Italian for me. Andrea, if you're there, could I ask that you just phrase that question in Italian for me?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, Tullio, I'm translating the questions in the chat, so please take a look at the chat.
Ok, grazie. Sì.
Switch in Italian. La domanda è se avete avuto problemi con il regolare campionamento dell'acqua, con le operazioni di campionamento, o procede ancora tutto alla normalità?
No, the sampling of the water is normal. The water, also the wastewater, is normal. Maybe sometime the control the company who the ARPA is the agency to for respect of the rule of the law. Don't sampling because they are at home.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm going to bring this webinar to a close in a few seconds' time. Thank you for your participation. Thank you. We rose to 77 people at one stage, and we've only dropped down to 71. So thank you that you stayed logged on. In particular, Tullio, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and for doing it in a language which isn't your first language. I'm incredibly thankful to you for that, as I'm sure is everyone else on this chat.
Okay.
And I hope that things settle for you soon.
Okay, thank you, but I'm sorry for my English.
Your English, as I said yesterday when we spoke, your English is 1,000 times better.
And also for my audio. This morning my audio is not good.
We can hear you fine. We can hear you fine.
Okay.
If anyone on this group feels that there's something they would like to share next week and who've got a particular story or a particular anecdote that you think would be useful, please let Charlotte or myself know. The emails, you've got our emails as well as our WhatsApp chats. We will then maybe try and repeat this next week with a part one being specifically around the WhatsApp chat, and part two entering into the wider things. And Tullio, you can see there's just been a swathe of thank yous to you for your input. Everybody keep safe, and hopefully speak to you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Good of you to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peace. Betsy. Okay.
Later.
Bye-bye.
I'm ending the meeting for all now. Oh, hang on, I've got to stop recording, haven't I? How do I do that?